Stop the wedding. Security now. Her voice cracked the room like thunder over glass, and for a second the quartet forgot which note came next. The bride's whitened smile sharpened into a blade. The guests craned like sunflowers toward scandal, and I stood in the aisle with my heart beating loud enough to rival the timpani. You know that feeling when the floor drops without warning, and every story you ever told yourself about love, loyalty, and family collapses in a single gulp? That was the day my old life ended. But the woman speaking to you now, 5 years and a few battles later, doesn't run anymore. She writes endings. But before I proceed, I want you to do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop your country in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening to me from. Thank you. I didn't always know how to hold my ground. Back then, I was the girl who mistook control for care. Atlanta had introduced us the polite way, Spellman and Morehouse mixers where ambition smelled like cologne and coconut oil. Stephen Gordon, tall, confident, code-slinging charmer, knew the science of attention, eye contact that lingered, compliments that felt private, even in crowded rooms. We built a bright story fast, brownstone in Virginia Highland with a porch that caught slow sunsets, laughter that turned into plans, 2 paychecks and then one after his "let me provide" speech fluttered like a banner I was raised to salute. "Baby, quit your job," he said one July evening as the city baked into peach cobbler. "The company's going places. I'm up for equity. I want you protected the way a man protects his home." Where I come from, provider language sits on Sunday pews like gospel. I was a rising marketing exec at Alma Broadcasting, shepherding big accounts and bigger ideas, but the word protection made a hungry ache quiet. I turned in my resignation beneath a wall of plaques that still smelled like fresh ink. My boss, one of those women who fought the 80s with shoulder pads and steel, studied me and said, "If you need the door again, kick it." I smiled like I'd never need to. Control doesn't announce itself, it creeps. First came the we time suggestions that sideline Diamond, my best friend since we shared cafeteria fries and dreams. "She's always pulling you away," he'd say, voice drenched in concern. Then the surprise weekend trips that collided with family visits, the "don't worry about money" reassurances that sounded like silk and settled like chains. Social workers will tell you financial abuse shows up in nearly every domestic violence case, about 95% by most studies. But nobody hands you that statistic with your wedding veil. I called it devotion. He called it love. The spreadsheet called it dependence. I tried to keep a piece of myself, a little online jewelry shop, a cute logo, inventory stacked in plastic bins like hope. "Why do you need your own money?" he asked, bruised pride masquerading as concern. "Aren't I enough?" As a Black Southern woman, I knew how to swallow that question with a smile, how to apologize for wanting fuel when I'd been told I was cargo. I shuttered the shop within a week, returned inventory in boxes that felt suspiciously like pieces of me. Isolation is a fog. By the time you notice it, you're lost. Girls' nights became negotiations. Family calls were later. Even my mother's recipes, the macaroni and cheese that could bless a room, turned into a performance of gratitude rather than joy. I told myself the quiet was peace. It was the muting of a life. When the storm finally hit, it arrived with a door left slightly ajar. I'd cooked jerk chicken and rice, tucked sweet tea into a basket, and walked into Stephen's office for a surprise lunch that felt like a restart. The receptionist wasn't there. The elevator doors opened like a stage cue. Laughter, his, familiar as a favorite song, and hers, familiar in a way that made my stomach lurch. Diamond sat on his desk, knuckles tracing the open collar of his shirt, a scene so intimate its careful distance felt obscene. He buttoned slowly like he was moderating a panel on damage control. "We need to talk," he said. I dropped the basket and watched the containers skitter like startled birds. "What is this?" I asked, though my bones already knew. 8 months, he admitted. The way men confess when they've already done the math on the fallout. Diamond's apology landed in the air like a tissue in a house fire. It just happened. It never just happens. That phrase is a tarp tossed over wreckage. I ran on instinct and fumes, drove through a city that had once felt like ours, then mine, then nobody's. At Piedmont Park, families swung children into the air, and I watched joy pass between strangers like currency I could no longer access. When he called, it wasn't to apologize. It was to manage. "Come home," he said. "We'll discuss this like adults." "Is there anything to discuss?" I whispered, though the echo answered. The divorce unspooled like a seminar in power. He arrived with lawyers who polished narratives for sport. I arrived with a court-appointed attorney chewing through 12 other cases that day. My years at Alma Broadcasting, the awards, the strategy decks, they evaporated in a courtroom that only respected current paychecks. "She voluntarily left her career," his counsel intoned, making sacrifice sound like a scam. Without documentation of coercion, no recordings of private "trust me" baby monologues, no texts where he'd framed my ambition as betrayal, the judge's ledger had no column for the invisible. I walked out with 2 suitcases, a one-time check that wouldn't cover 2 months' rent, and 60 days to invent a life. Grief is noisy, humiliation whispers. 2 weeks later, the nausea spoke first. I bought 3 tests from 3 different pharmacies because shame makes you theatrical. 2 stripes, then a blinking word on the third, pregnant. 8 weeks. The math drew itself on the wall. I called him because some habits of belief die last. "I'm pregnant," I said, voice shaking like a bent hanger. Silence. Then the sound of a man choosing an exit. "That's not my problem. Handle it. Clean it up." He hung up so smoothly I stared at the phone to see if my thumb had betrayed me. People say children save lives. Sometimes they save chapters. On the bathroom floor, cheek pressed to cold tile, I felt a flutter smaller than forgiveness. "Okay, baby," I whispered to the life I couldn't see. "I don't know how, but I will figure this out." The job market laughed in my face. Try explaining a 3-year resume gap to hiring managers who worship continuous growth, like a commandment. My call center headset became a crown of tin, 8 hours of strangers screaming about outages and fees while morning sickness turned into an afternoon ritual. I learned the geography of cheap groceries, the timing of bus routes, the seriousness of the word past due. At the county clinic, a technician frowned at the ultrasound, then smiled in a way that suggested the universe had jokes. "Let me get the doctor," she said. "Congratulations, you're having triplets." I laughed, then cried, then laughed again because sometimes a Black woman's survival sounds like mixed signals. 3 heartbeats, 3 names I hadn't yet earned the right to say. 3 futures trying on my ribcage for size. I won't lie to you, panic marched through my body with a clipboard. Formula, diapers, childcare, rent, none of it added up on a call center wage. But fear can be fuel when there's someone to burn it for. I called my sister, applied for every support alphabet in reach, WIC, SNAP, Medicaid, and memorized the shape of humility. Church aunties pressed envelopes into my palm with the conspiratorial kindness of people who have survived scarcity and know it by name. Strangers on the bus offered seats and small prophecies. "You're going to be okay, baby." Meanwhile, Stephen's world got shinier. Headlines announced his engagement to an influencer who understood angles and algorithms. Atlanta loved a spectacle, and this wedding promised fireworks. I avoided coverage until the girls, still inside me then, tiny elbows practicing opinions, kicked at my ribs while the TV in a waiting room announced the date. I changed the channel like it was a life choice. By the time the divorce paperwork yellowed at the edges, my belly had become geography. My sister held my hand through sleepless nights and bureaucratic mornings. One day slipped into the next like receipts. I folded hope into grocery lists and counted kicks like inventory. And yet, beneath the calculations, a new arithmetic formed. 1 mother, 3 girls, 4 hearts learning a rhythm that didn't require permission. The day the lab confirmed what the stick had shouted, I walked home in the heat and rehearsed a sentence I wasn't ready to say aloud. "I'm going to raise 3 daughters without their father." I unlocked my apartment, sat on the edge of the bed, and promised myself something bigger than rage. I would build a world so steady they'd never learn to mistake control for love. I would teach them that generosity needs guardrails and that provider is a verb anyone can conjugate. I would not chase a man who wanted a clean page more than a true story. What I didn't know then was how fast that story would accelerate, how a wedding I didn't attend would still pull us into its orbit, how a city's appetite for spectacle would become the wind at our backs. But first, I had to survive birth and then build a life from scratch. Labor came like a siren that forgot how to stop. At 3 a.m, my sister Lisa drove me down I-75 with the hazard lights blinking like prayer beads. Grady Hospital swallowed us into fluorescent mercy. Nurses moving with that practice choreography that means they've done this 1,000 times and know you're still terrified. Black mothers die at 3 times the rate of white mothers in this country. Triplet pregnancies multiply every risk. Those statistics sat on the edge of my bed like uninvited relatives, and I stared them down while a nurse named Wanda squeezed my hand and said, "You and those babies are not a number on my watch." Lily arrived first, 4 pounds in a roar, fists balled like she'd been born to argue her case. Emma followed, smaller but scanning the room with solemn, ancient eyes, as if she'd read the manual on life while she was floating. Zoe made a soft entrance, 3 pounds and 14 ounces of peace, with a tiny smile that almost felt like forgiveness. The NICU looked like the future. Tubes and beeps and transparent boxes where miracles nap. But the nurses talked to my girls like they were already women, and that felt like a blessing we didn't have to tithe for. 2 weeks later, we came home to a studio apartment that pretended to be bigger when we laughed. 3 bassinets lined one wall, diapers stacked like architecture, a whiteboard schedule with color-coded feedings that would make any project manager applaud. We didn't sleep, we rotated. I learned to burp a baby with one hand and answer a collection call with the other. Debt collectors know everything about policy and nothing about colic. Money, or the lack of it, pressed its thumb against our days. Wick kept formula on the shelf. Snap stretched beans into dinner and dinner into leftovers. Church aunties slid envelopes into my palm between amen and go in peace. The holy economy of women who remember standing where you stand. On Monday mornings, I put on my call center headset and absorbed America's rage about billing while my body still remembered surgery tape. I timed pumping sessions to 10-minute breaks and learned which supervisors looked the other way because their own mothers had worked the night shift. What saved me wasn't a miracle. It was a memory. My grandmother used to cook Sunday dinner like she was repairing the world. Fried chicken that made deacons dance, greens that tasted like testimony, mac and cheese so rich you'd call your cousin to brag. I could taste that food every time I needed courage. One April night, with the girls finally sleeping and the light at the sink pretending to be moonlight, the idea arrived whole. A food truck, nothing glamorous. A rolling kitchen named for the woman who taught me that feeding people is an act of leadership. The tax refund came like a modest lottery win, and I spent all of it on a battered truck with good bones and bad paint. I scrubbed it with vinegar and ambition until my arms ached, learned health department code like scripture, and wrote a menu that honored my grandmother's gospel. Keep it simple, make it honest, season it like you love them. I painted Evelyn's kitchen on the side in bright yellow with 3 small chef hats, purple for Lily, blue for Emma, pink for Zoe, because even infants deserve top billing when they're the reason you're brave. The first Saturday we parked near a farmer's market and sold exactly 27 plates. I called it a victory and a survey. Lily, 9 months old, strapped to my chest, supervised. Emma and Zoe, stroller royalty, watched customers the way future analysts watch data. The second weekend we doubled sales. By the end of summer, regulars greeted us by name and argued about whether the peach cobbler or banana pudding should be illegal. More than once, a stranger lingered to say, "I see you, sis. Keep going." That sounds small until you've been invisible. As the girls grew, so did the truck's reputation. At 2, Lily appointed herself bouncer of the playpen, protecting her sisters from rogue sippy cups. At 3, Emma lined up toy pots by diameter and corrected my counting. At 4, Zoe charmed the entire block with thank you stickers and solemn nods. The food paid a few more bills each month. The call center job covered rent. We were poor, yes, in the IRS sense, but we were also rich in a currency that doesn't collapse: purpose. When they started school, the girls leapt ahead like they had springs in their shoes. Teachers said words I wanted to frame: grit, empathy, gifted. We lived in a small apartment with mismatched chairs, but our dinner table hosted debates about planets and poetry. On the nights I cleaned offices after closing the truck, extra cash, extra exhaustion, they tucked each other in and left me drawings on the microwave that said, "Mama, we love you," in crooked letters that steadied my breath. Growth arrived as a dare. A banker, a black woman with locks and a smile that said she knew exactly how many doors had been closed on her, read my business plan twice, then slid a $75,000 small business loan across the desk. "Your margins are tight, but your story is tighter," she said. "Let's build something people can taste and trust." I signed with a pen that shook and found a small space in East Atlanta Village that used to be a failed cafe. We painted the walls the same yellow as the truck. I hung photos of my grandmother beside a chalkboard that read, "We season with memory." Opening day felt like jumping and hoping the ground would rise. It did, slowly, then all at once. Our mac and cheese became a minor local scandal. A food blogger wrote that our fried chicken could heal friendships, and I won't say he was wrong. More than the food, people came for the welcome. We learned names, asked about lost jobs and new babies, set aside a pay-what-you-can pot for anyone having a week that wouldn't behave. The girls, now 8, became the heart of the place. Lily greeting customers like a mayor, Emma counting cash with accountant seriousness, Zoe handing out napkins as if they were affirmations. For the first time since the courthouse, I felt fully myself. Tired, yes, but useful in a way that made fatigue feel like evidence. I had built something, not to spite Stephen, but to refuse the story he wrote for us. And then one night, after a catering gig downtown, the past tapped us on the shoulder. "Mama, what's our daddy's last name?" Emma asked as we wiped tables. I said it before I could stop myself. Phones came out like reflex. In seconds, the girls were staring at photos of Stephen at galas, Stephen on panels, Stephen with a new fiancée, a glossed, influencer perfect woman the city had anointed. Headlines called their upcoming ceremony the wedding of the year. My daughter's faces tried on 3 expressions at once: wonder, calculation, hurt. "He's rich," Zoe whispered, not with envy so much as with the slow dawning that our struggle had a person attached to it. "And getting married Saturday," Lily said, reading fast, already strategizing. "At the Four Seasons." She looked up at me with a steadiness that has rearranged more than one room. "We should go." I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect their hope from a man I knew could weaponize denial. But motherhood teaches you to respect a child's righteous hunger for truth. They didn't want a scene. They wanted to stand in front of the man whose absence had outlined their lives and say, "We exist." We had $100 for dresses. The discount store delivered 3 miracles in purple, blue, and pink. I found a simple black dress that said, "I'm not here to fight about fashion." Friday night, I braided hair until my fingers cramped and rehearsed sentences that didn't beg. The girls practiced introductions like a debate team. I pressed our birth certificates into my purse because facts deserve footwear. Saturday arrived with the kind of weather that makes Atlanta look like it's flirting. The Four Seasons glittered. Luxury cars exhaled money at the curb. Inside, a ballroom pulsed with strings and white flowers wide enough to be wearable. We stood across the street for a long minute, a squad of 4 breathing like one creature. "We walk in together," I said. "We walk out together. Whatever happens, we tell the truth." A staffer asked if we were with the Gordon Howell party. "We're family," I answered, which by any genealogy that matters, was true. We slipped in at the back. The officiant's voice floated across the room like a polished promise. And there, under a chandelier that cost more than my first truck, stood the man who had told me to clean up a pregnancy like it was a spill. "Is that him?" Zoe asked softly. "Yes," I said, laying a hand on her shoulder. "That's your father." Lily inhaled like a runner at the blocks. The quartet moved to a gentle cadence. The bride glided. I felt the first tremor of what was about to happen and understood that some collisions are not wrecks, they are reckonings. "Excuse me," Lily said, clear enough to cut the room. Every head turned. 3 girls in thrifted dresses, a mother in black, the past threading itself through a perfect day. I saw the moment recognition drain the color from Stephen's face. The hush tasted electrical. Somewhere a phone camera rose like a flag. And then we started down the aisle. The aisle felt longer than any road I'd ever driven. People say shame is hot, but truth is hotter. It burns away the polite parts of a room. We walked like a procession that refused to be invisible. The string quartet hesitated, notes falling like startled birds. Stephen's jaw set in that old calculating line, the one that always meant he was already drafting the story he'd tell afterward. The bride, Moran, glowed like new money and untested promises. I almost pitied her. We stopped 10 rows from the altar. I wanted to speak first, but Lily, born first and built for first, lifted her chin. "Excuse me," she said, voice bright as a bell. "We're here to meet our father." The sentence traveled the room, touched down on every face, and refused to apologize for its weight. Silence has varieties. This one carried interest and dread in equal measure. Stephen blinked, and then, just like in the boardrooms he worshipped, he reached for control. "Security," he said without looking at us. A tuxedoed manager shifted. The guards took a half step forward. "Touch them, and I will empty this room," I answered. And it was not a threat so much as a prophecy. My hand slid into my purse and found the folded proofs. Birth certificates, notarized copies, photographs with dates stamped by cheap pharmacy printers. I didn't take them out yet. First the human part, then the paperwork. Moran gripped her bouquet the way people grip railings during turbulence. "Stephen," she whispered, a small tremor sneaking past even her makeup artist's best work. "Who are they?" "Not mine," he said quickly. "A stunt." He aimed the word at me like a dart. Stunt. Women who won't be quiet are always accused of theater. Emma stepped forward, deliberate, her voice steady with the math of it. "We were born October 20th, 9 months and 6 days after January 30th, the last night you came home before the divorce papers. The county stamped the decree on February 14th that year. Your new lawyers should confirm the timeline." You could feel the crowd doing the arithmetic in real time. Heads tilting, lips moving, the honesty of numbers tightening the room. Moran's eyes flicked to the officiant, to the quartet, to her father in the front row, an investor in worry and spectacle. She faced Stephen again. "Did you know?" He gave me the look men give when they are about to call you crazy. "She's lying," he said, smooth as a closing bell. That old, weaponized calm washed over him. "This is extortion." I took a breath that tasted like years. "No, Stephen. Extortion is when you called me from your new condo and said, 'Handle it, clean it up,' and then hung up on your own child. Extortion is silence for comfort. We came for clarity." Phones were up now, angles finding us, the algorithms circling like a shark that smells blood and clicks. I felt the familiar fear, the terror of being reduced to a meme, but my girls stood with their hands laced and their spines straight. If I needed courage, I could borrow theirs. Zoe, smallest voice, biggest lungs when it mattered, raised a hand like she was in class. "I wanted to meet you," she told him softly. "That's all." The honesty of a child is a solvent. You could feel it loosening the glue on the lie. I unfolded the papers and held them like a fan. Fulton County birth certificates for Lily, Emma, and Zoe Williams. Witness signatures, time of delivery, hospital stamp. I can share copies with counsel. I kept my tone professional because women are punished for volume and punished for silence and punished for tears. Professionalism is the armor they can't pretend not to understand. The room inhaled, a hive of whispers. A groomsman took a small, uncertain step back. The officiant, the one who'd just been speaking on love as if it were a contract, closed his book and let the moment breathe. Even the quartet, mercifully, set their bows down and stopped trying to soundtrack a reckoning. Moran turned to the crowd microphone, voice thin but audible. "Ma'am," she said to me, "why here? Why now?" There was plea in it and pride, and the frantic math of a woman calculating the price of not knowing. "Because visibility is cheap on any other day," I said. "Because we wrote to him, and he ignored us. Because he told me our daughters were a problem to be solved. Because sometimes you have to go where a lie is about to be notarized." I gestured toward the arch of imported roses. "A wedding is a vow. Truth deserves a seat." Lily touched my wrist, a private, steadying signal, then faced the altar again. "This is Emma," she said, not presenting so much as bearing witness. "She loves numbers and fairness." Emma nodded once, solemn. "And this is Zoe. She loves stories and animals and making people feel better." Zoe gave the room a tentative smile, the kind that forgives on principle and only later asks if forgiveness was earned. "I'm Lily. I want to be a lawyer and make rules that protect people like us." There was movement in the front row. An older woman, pearls tight at her throat, dabbed at her eyes and didn't bother to hide it. Black women recognize labor when they see it. She knew what it cost to stand there without apology. Stephen tried to pivot again, defaulting to the position that had rescued him from every mess before. "This is inappropriate," he told the room. "We'll handle it privately." "Privately is how we got here," I said. Behind the cameras, heads nodded almost imperceptibly, the kind of acknowledgement people offer when they're too close to power to clap. Moran's father rose then, offended masculinity wrapped in bespoke tailoring. "Remove them," he ordered a security captain, forgetting he was not the one getting married, forgetting the internet lives in pockets. The captain glanced at me, then at the girls, then at the phones. He had the weary eyes of a man who knows which headlines pay his mortgage. He didn't move. Time folded. For a breath, I saw everything at once. The bus station where I vowed to raise my brother after our parents died. The warehouse where men tried to erase me. The hospital where my daughters arrived like a 3-part sermon. I thought about how Black women are told to be gentle toward the feelings of the powerful, while bleeding silently for the weak. I decided to choose my daughters over everyone's comfort. "We're leaving," I said, "because we came to speak, not to stay." I turned to Moran. "Please get a prenup that can lift iron. Keep your own accounts. Don't let generosity be a leash. Women survive men like him by writing down everything and believing the first red flag." Moran stood very still. I don't know what she believed that second, only that believing would cost her something. Weddings are expensive, but denial costs more. We pivoted. 3 small backs, 1 tired mother, walking the length of a carpet that had never learned how to witness. Halfway to the doors, Lily stopped and faced the crowd one last time. "We're not asking for anything," she said, voice ringing. "We just wanted the truth to live in the same room as the vows." We stepped into the lobby where the air felt less rehearsed. The girls' palms were damp in mine. "You were brave," I told them, though brave is a word adults paste over children when we are secretly terrified we let them do too much. Outside, Atlanta's afternoon glared honest and hot. We made it to the car. I put the key in the ignition. My phone exploded. Messages, missed calls, alerts stacking like dominoes. By the time we buckled our seatbelts, the first clip had hit the timeline. "Billionaire's wedding interrupted by 3 girls claiming to be his daughters." Caption writers love the neatness of scandal. They care less for its aftermath. Views climbed. Strangers elevated us and insulted us, often in the same breath. Some called us grifters. Others called us heroes. I tried to hold none of it, to hold only my daughters' faces. On Monday, our restaurant line twisted around the block. People wanted mac and cheese and proximity to a story. A reporter from Channel 2 asked for the chance to do it right. Longer than a clip, quieter than a shout. I said yes because being edited by the internet is how you become a trope. In the interview, I refused to name the bride or the hotel. I named statistics instead. More than half of single mothers in Georgia live at or near the poverty line. Black women entrepreneurs make up the fastest-growing segment of new business owners, but receive less than 1% of venture capital. We're not an anomaly, I said into the lens. We are a demographic that keeps surviving. The segment aired at 7 p.m. and landed like a hymn. It didn't glamorize the wedding. It showed the truck, the chalkboard, the yellow walls, my girls bagging to-go orders while finishing algebra. It shaped us into subjects rather than props. Donation links appeared we hadn't asked for. So did critics who said dignity is nice but money is nicer. The internet is a mirror with a million faces and all of them talk at once. And then, because men who live at altitude always try to purchase the ground, an envelope arrived by courier. A business opportunity, the letter called it. A number big enough to buy quiet for a decade, tied to a non-disclosure that would erase us from our own story. My girls read it at the kitchen table, eyes skimming clauses like women twice their age. "Mama?" Lily asked. "What's the price of a voice?" "More than this," I answered, though the sum could have bought 3 college educations, a mortgage-free house, the kind of cushion my body still couldn't imagine. We slept badly that night. I counted our bills and our blessings and ended up where I always do, with the belief that the story we tell about ourselves is the only inheritance that compounds without cruelty. In the morning, I drafted a reply that declined the offer in a tone polite enough to survive court discovery. The reply triggered something we didn't expect, a wave of community hands. Restaurant owners quietly sent us their vendor contacts. An auntie-led nonprofit offered free legal guidance for small businesses facing intimidation. A teenage girl came in with a crumpled $10 and told my daughters, "This is for the Tuesday project you should start to help women before it gets bad." We scribbled the idea on a sticky note and taped it to the office wall like a seed packet waiting for rain. That week, the girls asked fewer questions about the man at the altar and more about payroll, procurement, and how to scale without shrinking our soul. I realized the wedding hadn't just exposed him, it had clarified us. We would build, and we would do it loudly enough to help someone else, but a reckoning rarely travels alone. On a Thursday, while I was rolling pie crusts and humming my grandmother's radio station, an unfamiliar number flashed across my phone. "This is David Kim," a clipped voice said, "CFO of Gordon Tech Industries. Mr. Gordon requests a meeting, private, off record. He has an offer to ensure your daughter's futures." The pies kept their shape under my hands. "They already have a future," I said. "We're cooking it." "Just hear him out," he urged. "It's generous." So are we, I thought. But generosity with guardrails is policy, not weakness. I told him we'd consider a public meeting at our restaurant. Nothing secret, nothing to bargain with our silence. I hung up and looked at my daughters tying on aprons. Lily rolled her eyes in perfect 12-year-old fluency. Emma wrote "guardrails gifts" on the whiteboard. Zoe doodled a tiny yellow food truck with wings. We had stepped into a bigger story, not because we loved the spotlight, but because the truth had kicked open a door. What we did next would decide whether the light seared or warmed. He showed up on a Tuesday, because of course he did. Tuesdays were our quiet hustle days. Vendor calls, prep lists, the girls doing homework at their claimed corner table while I tested a new spice ratio for the greens. The bell over the door gave its cheerful jingle, and there he was, Stephen Gordon in a navy suit that made noon look like an evening gala, wearing the same curated calm that had once convinced me to hand over a life. He scanned the room and found us. 3 teenagers in aprons with flour on their knuckles, and a mother who no longer trembled. He took off his sunglasses like a confession and approached our booth. Customers pretended not to stare, but failed. Fame is just curiosity with a camera app. "Evelyn," he said, nodding as if this were a quarterly review. "Thank you for agreeing." "I didn't," I replied. "But you're here. Sit." He lowered himself onto the vinyl across from me, the same way he entered boardrooms, composed, certain he could buy gravity. The girls drifted closer not because they needed anything from him, but because they refused to be negotiated in their absence. "I came to apologize," he began, and for a moment I saw the freshman study partner who used to split lo mein with me in a dorm hallway. "And to make amends." "Amends aren't checks," I said. Lily, who now carried herself like a pre-law manifesto, folded her arms. Emma unclicked a pen with precise disinterest. Zoe took the temperature of the air and set a glass of water between us like a tiny peace offering nobody had asked for. He sighed, a calibrated exhale. "I know you've built something impressive, and I respect it. But there are ways I can help. Private schools, trust funds, travel programs. The world opens wider with the right resources." Emma didn't look up from her worksheet. "We're already in advanced math and dual enrollment classes," she said, tone neutral. "We open our own doors." Stephen pivoted. "I also want time," he said, the word catching as it left him. "Supervised, if that makes you comfortable. Let me get to know them. Let me show—" "Show who?" Lily interrupted. "Us or the people watching?" He met her eyes and flinched at the unflinching. "I can't undo the past, but I can invest in the future." "You're not a venture capital round," I said, and heard the old ache trying to rise. I put a palm on it. "Stay. If you want to be present, start by showing up without a portfolio." Zoe slid into the booth beside me, soft voice steady. "We like museums," she offered. "Poetry slams on Thursdays, the animal shelter on Saturdays. And we like boundaries," Lily added. "No press, no gifts bigger than a book, no NDA ever." Stephen nodded, taking notes in his mind like a man tracking a market. "Okay," he agreed too fast. "Okay." The next month, he kept to the schedule like a man paying down a debt. He met them at the High Museum and listened to Zoe parse a landscape painting into verbs and light. He sat through an open mic where a kid in a denim jacket read a poem that peeled the room to silence, and he clapped too loudly, learning what sincerity feels like. He toured the shelter and asked awkward questions about intake and surrender, words my daughters handled with more grace than he did. He bought them notebooks, paperbacks, a field sketch set, and tried not to calculate return on investment. But even tenderness can wear angles. He'd glance at his watch between exhibits. He'd steer toward conversations about legacy, philanthropy, the Gordon name. He mistook exposure for intimacy, itinerary for presence. After the third visit, Emma whispered what we were all learning. He wants a montage. At the restaurant, the world spun around our quiet orbit. The Tuesday project went from sticky note to bank account, from idea to intake form. We put a sign on the wall, small and serious. Emergency microgrants, legal hotline referrals, safety planning. We set limits. No cash on site. Everything documented, nothing unsafe. And watched the city send us one person at a time who needed enough help to keep a predator's plan from maturing. The letter declining Stephen's hush money had leaked by then, and the think pieces arrived like weather fronts. Some praised dignity. Some scolded me for sacrificing my children's security to prove a point. We learned to scroll past the op-eds and count the receipts. Pies sold, employees hired, women who left at noon with a stack of forms and a bus fare, instead of staying with a man who thought access was ownership. On a Sunday night, a revered chef from across town slipped into a booth and told me he'd stocked our walk-in with produce the supply chain kept pricing out of reach. "No credit," he said, gruff to hide the softness. "Call it professional development." A pastor sent a security firm with cameras that didn't just see, they deterred. A retired judge taught our staff how to document harassment without setting themselves on fire. The city, for all its gossip, kept its promises where it counts. In casseroles and counsel and quiet envelopes. Stephen noticed, because of course he did. Men who live in glass towers glance down and mistake reflection for insight. In week 5, he asked to take the girls to an award dinner. "Table seats 10, he said, pushing a glossy invite across the counter. It would mean something to have them there. Zoe traced the embossed letters and then slid the invitation back. "We eat dinner on floors sometimes," she told him. "Picnic style, it also means something." "You're trying to buy a timeline," Lily said. She didn't say it unkindly, she said it like truth with a sweater on. "You can't." He tried anyway, because trying had always been his religion. He showed up with a binder labeled Opportunities, scholarship programs, summer intensives, an email from a donor who could get them into rooms most girls of their zip code never see. He talked fast when he was nervous, and this time he was sprinting. Emma rested her chin in her palm. "Why do you want us?" she asked. "Not mean, just surgical. Us as we are, not as a brochure." He paused too long before he answered. "Because I'm lonely," he said finally, and the word echoed more than he intended. "Because money doesn't applaud when you're tired. Because I look at what you built and I want to belong to it. You can want the right thing for the wrong reason. You can want the right thing and not know how to hold it." My girls had become experts at reading motives in mouths and hands and calendar invites. They huddled that night at the kitchen table with hot chocolate and the gravity of women twice their age. I washed pans the way you pray when words won't kneel. "We'll stop," Lily said when they were done deciding. "We'll thank him and stop. He brings gifts when we asked for time. He brings plans when we asked for attention. He doesn't mean harm, he means speed." The next afternoon she told him on the patio where the light takes no sides. "We appreciate the effort," she said, "but this feels like a rollout, not a relationship. We're not a corrective for your loneliness. We're daughters who needed a father then and need different things now." Stephen's face did a complicated thing. Pride, shame, relief, fear, all trying to sit in the same chair. Is there a path?" he asked. Zoe answered him with that terrifying gentleness children sometimes weaponize for good. "Maybe one day," she said. "But it's long and slow, and you can't drive it like a freeway." He swallowed and nodded. He looked at me, not for rescue, but for the first true advice he'd asked of me in a decade. "How do I learn the slow part?" "Start by being ordinary," I said. "Send a birthday card you wrote yourself. Ask for a book recommendation and read it. Show up to a debate without asking for the stage. Tiny, boring, faithful things. No cameras, no captions." He left with empty hands, which was the first honest way he'd ever left us. For a while he sent postcards, museums he visited alone, a poem he didn't understand but tried to, a photograph of the dog he adopted because Zoe kept talking about the shelter. He signed them, not Dad, not S, just Stephen. I put them in a shoebox next to report cards and first menus and the newspaper clipping about the Tuesday Project's first 100 grants. Meanwhile, our life grew in right angles. We opened a second shop in Buckhead with prices that paid staff a living wage and a prominent sign explaining why our tea costs 50 cents more. We hired 2 women who'd used our hotline, and they trained new hires like sergeants of grace. A banker with braids slid across a loan packet designed for minority-owned businesses and said, "Call me before you sign, I'll walk you through the fine print." We listened, learned, and said yes to only what kept us honest. The internet kept trying to turn us into a moral of its choosing. One week we were saints, the next fools for turning down other people's definitions of security. I kept reminding my daughters that going viral is not a verb that builds character. What builds character is getting the grease out of a favorite apron and showing up when you don't feel cinematic. They rolled their eyes, then showed up anyway. When it rained, we practiced gratitude like a sport. When the ovens failed, we practiced grace like it was cardio. When a woman came in with sunglasses and a bruise she called clumsy, we practiced the choreography we'd trained for. Coffee, back office, a card slid quietly across the desk, 3 numbers circled, a rideshare summoned by a staff account so it wouldn't show up on a phone bill an abuser watched. Ordinary heroism is a spreadsheet with a soul. By winter, the city stopped pointing as much and started partnering. The community college asked me to guest teach a unit on kitchen economics and care. A law clinic hosted a Prenups Without Predators night in our dining room. A barbershop posted our hotline next to a flyer about hypertension because protection takes many forms. The night before Christmas Eve, we closed early and ate family meal at table 3. The girls traded stories from the shift. The rude influencer who softened at the first bite of pie. the elderly couple who insisted on paying for the table of college kids studying finals. We went around and said one hard thing and one good thing from the year. When it was my turn, I said the hard thing was learning how to mother in public without letting the public mother me. The good thing was simpler. We were all still here. After dinner, I pulled down the shoebox and passed out the postcards. "He's trying," Zoe said, leafing through the stack. "He's learning boredom," Emma revised. "He's learning absence isn't neutral," Lily concluded. Outside, the city lights did what they've always done, looked pretty and asked no questions. Inside, our small place hummed with a different electricity, the kind that doesn't trend but does endure. We locked up, turned the sign to rest, and stepped into air sharp enough to teach lungs respect. We weren't at the end or the beginning. We were in the sturdy middle where lives are actually made. The wedding had started a fire. We kept deciding to be heat and not ash. If the last scene felt like turning the rest sign and stepping into the winter air, then this is the morning after, when the key slides into the lock again and you choose, with ordinary hands, to open. That's the part nobody glamorizes, the decision to be consistent after the world stops pointing. We came back the next day to the same scuffed tile, the same stubborn oven, the same little bell over the door. Only now, the quiet had weight. It held our names without spectacle. The months that followed were less about plot twists and more about brickwork. The Tuesday project moved from our back office to a real suite down the block with 2 rooms, 4 chairs, 1 well-worn rug, and a whiteboard crowded with phone numbers people whispered to each other when whispering was safest. We didn't become saviors. We became organizers. Microgrants were small on paper and large in practice. 3 nights in a motel at the right moment can be the difference between "I'll stay" and "I'm gone." We learned to measure impact like cooks, not by applause but by emptier plates. In the restaurant, the girls grew into their edges. Lily started running mock hearings at the kitchen table, turning napkins into exhibits and teaching her sisters how to object without burning bridges. Emma wrote a cost model on a legal pad that somehow made numbers feel like kindness. Zoe hung a rotating exhibit of neighborhood art along the long wall by the windows, then watched a retired bus driver stare at his own painting like he'd just met an old friend. When Joy showed up, it always had work boots on. Sometimes, when the night closed soft and the dining room went still, I'd pull the shoebox of postcards and pass them across the table. The handwriting was neater now, the sentences less curated. Stephen had learned the punctuation of humility. "Read this one," Zoe would say, handing me a card with a sketch of the museum's atrium. He'd written, "The guard said she sees more fathers here on weekends now. I hope some of them are learning slow, too." Once, a folded photo slipped out. A dog with lopsided ears, a caption on the back. "Duke, he's teaching me to earn trust daily." I tucked that one under the rubber band with a feeling I couldn't name without ruining it. We didn't reconcile into a Hallmark ending. We practiced a boundary that looked like a country border with friendly customs. He mailed birthday cards with corny jokes and no checks. The girls sent thank yous and sometimes a recommendation. Books, a documentary, a late-night jazz playlist they said was good for men practicing quiet. Once, he asked if he could attend Lily's citywide debate final. "In the back row," she answered. "As a citizen, not a headline." He came, sat small, and clapped when a kid from across town dismantled a lazy argument with the precision of a surgeon. That felt like the most honest thing he'd done in years. By spring, the day came we'd trained for without knowing it. Caps and gowns, tassels tilting forward like they were listening. The graduation gym was too warm, smelling of flowers and other people's nostalgia. Lily floated across the stage with a grin that could have powered a city block. Emma followed, eyes bright, a scholarship sash draped like a math problem solved. Zoe, who once apologized to aunts for stepping near their hill, accepted an arts fellowship with the calm of someone who had already chosen her lane. I clapped until my palms warned me about bones. Somewhere in the back, I felt a familiar presence. No sunglasses, no entourage. He didn't approach. He didn't wave, he just watched. And for once, watching wasn't a synonym for owning. When the speeches ended and the caps rose like a flock startled into joy, I let myself cry. Not for what we lost, for what we built exactly the hard way. The restaurants grew responsibly, like a tree that refuses to outpace its roots. A new location in Birmingham, because family is also a place. One in Savannah, because the smell of salt makes cornbread taste like it remembers something. Franchise inquiries knocked so hard we had to write values in bold on the first page and no in bolder on the second. We added health insurance, paid family leave, a little scholarship fund for staff who wanted to take night classes. We posted schedules 2 months out because terror thrives in uncertainty and kindness can be a calendar. Meanwhile, the Tuesday Project tightened its seams. We put a clinician beside a financial coach because trauma needs both a hand to hold and a spreadsheet that balances. We hosted locks and ledgers nights, half security basics, half budgeting with boundaries. Aunties came with nieces, uncles came with sons. Women in church hats asked exquisite questions about prenups. Teenagers in hoodies asked better ones about passwords. We learned to teach generosity with guardrails. Love isn't a leash, I'd tell the room, and watch shoulders drop like someone had just unhooked an invisible weight. One evening, our little office filled with the soft chaos of a community mid-decision. A woman comparing routes on a map, a volunteer calling a shelter, a retired teacher labeling a folder New Start in tidy script. The bell over the main door jingled. A young man stepped in carrying a parcel wrapped in butcher paper and string. "My grandmother told me to bring you this," he said, setting it on the desk. Inside sat a battered, beautiful cookbook filled with notes in a looping hand. On the first page, a name, Celeste. I sat down before my knees remembered how to be furniture. The waitress who once changed the math of a story we thought was solved had sent us the book that seasoned her life. No return address, just the gift and the lesson. Anonymous courage keeps opening doors it never sees. If this were fiction, I might end here, with a symbolic heirloom and a city exhaling. But life keeps handing you Monday morning. Bills, leaky sinks, a staffer whose mom got sick, a former client who relapses into a relationship because grief has muscle memory. We failed sometimes. We apologized. We started again. That's the whole sermon. I won't pretend we never think about alternate timelines. Occasionally, Zoe will wonder out loud if Duke knows any tricks now. Emma will redesign our original kitchen on graph paper just for fun and argue with past me about efficient flow. Lily will laugh at herself for checking case law on a Saturday and then call it what it is. Joy in the long game. On those nights, I take the shoebox down, run my fingers along the rubber band, and choose to believe that slow goodness adds up in ways the internet can't trend. You've walked with us this far, through the rupture, the rebuilding, the messy middle where most of the work hides. So here's where I turn from our table to yours. If our story touched a rib, if it steadied your breath, do one small thing that is both kind and structured. Call the friend whose generosity has been exploited and offer them a ride, a calendar, a plan. Share the hotline numbers in your community, but also learn how restraining orders actually work where you live. Donate? Sure, but also ask the organizations you love what guardrails they use so your help doesn't become another leash. If you run a business, write the policy you wish you'd had. HR rules that make intimacy with power a fireable offense. Benefits that treat family care as an asset, not an absence. If you're young and hungry, practice boundaries like they're a language. Because they are. If you survived betrayal and are still here, type, "I'm still here," in the comments, and drop your city, so someone scrolling at 3 a.m. can see the map glow. If you love someone who rescues everyone but themselves, send this to them gently and tell them they're allowed to give with a ledger. If you're mid-escape and can't say it out loud yet, know that a world of strangers is rooting for your tomorrow. And if this story helped you breathe easier for 10 minutes, Subscribe, like, and share. Not for vanity, but to pull more chairs to this table. The more of us there are, the brighter the room gets and the harder it becomes for predators to write other people's endings. As for us, we'll keep telling true things here. Messy, useful, human. We'll post recipes with footnotes about consent. We'll talk budgets and boundaries in the same sentence. We'll keep a chair open for the anonymous heroes and the loudly ordinary. We'll run our little empire with the arrogance of kindness and the humility of a dish rag. On a recent Sunday, we closed early and walked to the park with paper plates and a pan of mac and cheese that never seems to cool. The sky looked like it had forgiven something. Lily rehearsed an opening statement to a tree. Emma taught Zoe a shortcut for balancing a column of numbers in her head. I let myself watch them without preparing the next crisis in my mind. Across the field, a jogger slowed, waved, and kept going. Just a human acknowledging other humans. It felt like a benediction that didn't need words. Before we headed home, I stood a moment and whispered to the part of me that still bargains with ghosts. We won't be defined by what broke us, we'll be measured by what we build. Then I texted the team the next week's schedule and wrote at the top what I always write: feed, protect, repeat. If you need this mantra, borrow it. If you have a better one, leave it below so someone else can borrow it from you. That's how this works. Thread by thread, city by city, people choosing ordinary courage until the fabric is too strong to tear. Thank you for the time, the ears, the patience. Bring your testimony. Bring your map. Bring your ledger and your ladle. We've got work to do, and not all of it needs to be loud to be real.